guys, welcome back to another video. Today's video is another weird world history, and today I'm going to be talking about the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. The Great Moon Hoax, or the Great Moon Hoax of 1835, was a series of 6 articles published to The Sun, a New York newspaper, starting on August 25th, 1835. These articles described the discovery of life on the moon. The discoveries were falsely attributed to Sir John Herschel and his fictitious companion Andrew Grant. This was a time of exciting events, theories, and claims, and stories based in astrology did very well, even if they weren't all based in fact. The author composed an article as if it was written by an astronomer who accompanied John Herschel on his expedition. It included quotes from John, discoveries made about the moon, and it came off very scientific. It was written in a way that John would normally write, and they even cited the Edinburgh Journal of Science to back them up to make it sound more legit. The author reeled his readers in very slowly, including reasons as to why he was heading to South Africa and a new telescope that John had created. This helped the credibility of the story, as John was going to South Africa on an expedition and did bring a telescope that he built himself. Towards the end of the second article, forests and plants were described on the moon, including a few birds and mammals and a unicorn-like creature. At this point, other newspapers began printing the story from the beginning. By the third installment, more was described about the flora and fauna of the moon, including a few more animals, like mini bison and beavers that stand on 2 feet. A live volcano was described, which did match with what William Herschel described what he saw on the moon in 1787. The segment concluded with the description of an island covered in cliffs studded with sapphires. In the fourth installment, printed August 28, 1835, is when John supposedly discovered humanoids on the moon. We could then perceive that they possessed wings of great expansion and were similar in structure to this of a bat, being a semi-transparent membrane expanded in curvilineal divisions by means of straight radii, united at the back by the dorsal integuments. But what astonished us very much was the circumstance of this membrane being continued from the shoulders to the legs, united all the way down, though gradually decreasing in width. The telescope, transported from England to South Africa, was described as being many times larger than any other telescope in the world, 24 feet in diameter and 7 tons in weight. Eventually, the author announced that the observations had to be stopped because the sun reflected into the telescope and turned into a burning glass, lighting the observatory they were in on fire. The articles were never retracted. However, on September 16, 1835, the Sun did report that the articles were fake. The writer of the articles was not originally known. However, it has been attributed to Richard Adams Locke, who was a reporter for the Sun at the time these articles were written. Locke publicly admitted to being the author in 1840 when he wrote a letter to a different newspaper. Despite Locke basically admitting that it was him, there have still been rumors about maybe it was someone else and he was just claiming fame. Maybe someone else wrote it. 2 other men have been attributed to the hoax. Jean-Nicolas Nicolet, who was a French astronomer traveling around America at the time. He was in Mississippi when these articles were written, in New York, but, you know, there could be ways to get about that. And Lewis Gaylord Clark, who was the editor of the Knickerbocker magazine. However, there's no real evidence to connect either of these two to the hoax other than Locke, because, well, he said he wrote it, so. He worked at the Sun, he was in New York. It makes sense. Assuming Locke did write these articles, there's 2 main reasons as to why he might do this. 1, it sells newspapers, so he's writing these articles for the paper he works for, which sells more papers. And 2, he was probably making fun of all of the astronomically hilarious theories and claims at the time. People were saying some weird shit about astronomy, and he just wanted to jump on the train. Locke probably intended for this to be a satire, showing how science can be and how religion can influence it. For instance, in 1824, Franz von Paula Gruhusen, professor of astronomy at Munich University, had published a paper titled Discovery of Many Distinct Traces of Lunar Inhabitants, especially of one of their colossal buildings. The author of that paper claimed that he saw different shades of color on the moon, claiming that that indicated climate and vegetation zones. He also observed lines and geometrical shapes, which he decided meant there must be walls and roads and buildings. One theory is that this paper inspired Locke to create the articles in the first place, because that title alone is wild. According to legend, the Sun's newspaper sales skyrocketed after the hoax was published. It brought the journal to international fame and allowed readers to investigate. However, the degree to which the hoax skyrocketed this newspaper has been exaggerated from time to time, but it did help the newspaper regardless. And it was not announced to be a hoax for weeks after it was published, and it was never actually retracted. It got them so much money that they decided, we're just gonna leave it. John Herschel, an actual astronomer, was amused at the start of the hoax, as, you know, it was a very fantastical story, and he even claimed that none of his observations would ever be to that level. However, that excitement and amusement died pretty quickly when people who read the hoax thought it was real and started asking him legit questions about it, and he was just getting annoyed because he had no part of this and he didn't want to deal with them. By the time the articles started talking about bat people, that's when people were like, okay, this is probably not real. That's how the author brought them in, is he started very legit. It sounded very scientific, talking about flora and fauna and maybe a few animals, and people were like drawn in thinking like, oh, this is really cool. And then when you start doing mystical creatures, kind of like Mothman, you're gonna lose a few people. And that's when people were like, I think this might be a hoax. Edgar Allan Poe actually claimed that this hoax was plagiarism, and it was plagiarism of his earlier story, The Unparalleled Adventure of One Hans Pfaall, published in the Southern Literary Messenger. His editor at the time was Richard Adam Locke. So if he is the author of these articles, it's not a far jump to say that he may have plagiarized some from Edgar, as he was the editor of that same exact story. The story was reprinted in the New York Transcript from September 2nd to September 5th, 1835, under a different name. Poe described a voyage to the moon in a balloon. The main character of the story stayed on the moon for 5 years with the lunarians, and when he returned to Earth, he brought one with him. In his day, a satire was considered successful if a good portion of the readers believed it to be true. However, Edgar's humor betrayed him, and readers believed it to be fake almost right away. Also, the literary messenger that he had published his story in was only 10 months old at the time and didn't have widespread attention. Locke was able to upstage Edgar Allan Poe and steal his thunder. Whether he plagiarized Edgar's story or not, he still beat him to the punch. Locke's sensational reports were not out of place for the time, as a lot of penny press newspapers were around at this time, including The Sun. The Sun got a lot of its money from advertisements, and the more people who read the newspapers gives them more money. The Sun was a pioneer in creating shocking and sensational journalism. They were one of the first papers to report on suicides, murders, and divorces in the city. These stories attracted readers to their articles, which then gave them readers to their advertisements. The success of such sensational stories as the Great Moon Hoax can be attributed and influenced by contemporary speculative science. Figures like Reverend Thomas Dick, claiming that there were billions of beings on the moon, captured the public's imagination, and they ran with it. This hoax played on similar popular beliefs, claiming to be scientific in nature from someone who was in the field, which gave it credibility. Using an actual person's name who was an astronomer, who was in South Africa at the time, who built his own telescope and brought it with him, who was studying the stars, which, could include the moon, using quotes and journals to back up their evidence, brought people in. Until the end when, they kind of gave themselves away with bat people. But hey, who doesn't love a cool bat person? I had not heard of the Great Moon Hoax until I was researching for this, and man is it wild. Claiming that there's bat-like people and unicorns and beavers that stand on 2 feet on the moon is pretty interesting. And obviously the technology back then was not as good as it is today, so maybe they were seeing shapes that they thought could be buildings or forests or you name it. Now our telescopes are much, much better, and we know there's not billions of beings on the planet, or as far as we know, I guess. And I just find it really interesting that this person wrote it in a way that made it more believable so people would be drawn in, and then it was revealed to be fake. Now, whether Locke really did write this article or if he just claimed it was his and someone else wrote it, who knows? Maybe he did plagiarize Edgar Allan Poe. Maybe he didn't. We don't know. However, I do find it very interesting and entertaining. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be back again next week with another one. Alright guys, see you later.